When Jess Thompson, a skilled mechanic, bought a dilapidated warehouse for just $500, she expected nothing more than a rusty, abandoned space to store her tools and work on her side projects. But when a sudden tremor cracked open the floor beneath her feet, she found something far more dangerous, a hidden nuclear bunker. What she discovered inside would not only change her life, but could alter everything she thought she knew about the past. Before we get started, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're into jaw-dropping stories like this, hit that subscribe button, because what comes next is even more unbelievable. Jess Thompson wiped the sweat from her brow as she looked at the old warehouse in front of her. The sprawling structure, located on the outskirts of town, had seen better days. Rust ran like veins across the steel beams, and the paint had long since peeled away, leaving the walls scarred and exposed to the elements. The roof sagged in places, and the concrete floor was cracked and uneven. To the casual observer, this place was nothing more than a forgotten relic of a bygone era. But to Jess, it was a diamond in the rough. She had been hunting for a new space to expand her small mechanic shop for months. Business was booming, and she had outgrown the tiny garage she'd inherited from her father. But the price of real estate in the city was outrageous, and the warehouses around town were either too expensive or too far gone to save. Then, one day, she saw the ad, a rundown warehouse on the edge of town for only $500. She had barely hesitated before contacting the owner. The man who sold it to her was elderly, his voice crackling through the phone as he described the place. "No one's been here in years," he'd told her. "The roof's leaking, the floors are cracked, and there's a lot of junk. But if you've got the right tools, it's yours. Can't promise it'll be pretty, though." Jess had chuckled. "I'm a mechanic. Pretty doesn't matter." So, here she was, standing in front of her new property, staring at the warehouse that would soon house her dreams. With a deep breath, she pushed open the rusted metal door. It creaked in protest, but the hinges held. The inside was dim, lit only by the waning afternoon sun filtering through cracks in the walls. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of mildew hung heavy in the air. Boxes and broken equipment were scattered across the floor, remnants of whoever had used this place before. Jess stepped in, her boots crunching on the gravel and debris beneath her. It was a mess, but it was her mess now. She'd always liked a challenge, and this warehouse was the ultimate test. She could see it in her mind, how it would all come together. A new garage, a bigger space to work, a place where she could truly stretch her legs. Her fingers ran along the rough, rusting edges of a nearby shelf. She smiled to herself, imagining the tools and equipment she'd bring in to fill this space. She could already picture it. Workbenches, car lifts, new lighting. It would be a dream come true. But as she took another step inside, she felt something shift. The building seemed quieter than it should have been. Even the wind outside seemed to avoid it, like the place was in a perpetual state of stasis. She paused, listening for any sound that might indicate life. But nothing. Jess shrugged it off. "It's just an old warehouse. Probably the echo of years of neglect," she muttered to herself. She reached into her bag, pulling out her phone to check the time. She had a lot of work ahead of her if she was going to make this place usable. The floor would need to be reinforced, the walls patched, and the wiring rewired. It was going to be a lot of hard work, but Jess was used to that. It wasn't just a job to her, it was a passion, and the bigger the challenge, the better. Taking a deep breath, she pulled her phone back into her pocket and rolled up her sleeves. The first step was clearing out the debris. She grabbed a crowbar from her truck and set to work. As she moved through the space, Jess couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air, thick with dust, felt strangely heavy. She dismissed it as exhaustion from a long day of traveling. But as the hours passed and she cleared out more junk, she began to notice something strange. A faint hum. Almost like a distant engine, but softer, quieter. Jess paused, looking around the room. The sound wasn't loud enough to be a machine. It felt more like it was coming from beneath the floor, deep, subtle, and almost rhythmic. She knelt down and ran her hand over the cracked concrete. The vibrations beneath her fingers were faint but unmistakable. "Must be the pipes," she muttered, though even she didn't fully believe it. But she continued working, unwilling to let a little oddity distract her from the task at hand. She had a vision, and nothing was going to stop her from seeing it through, or so she thought. The next day, Jess returned to the warehouse with more tools, and a renewed sense of purpose. She was determined to turn the place into something practical, something that would serve as a home for her business and maybe even a new chapter of her life. The faint hum from the previous evening had lingered in her mind, but she brushed it aside. Today was all about progress. The morning light streamed through the gaps in the roof, casting slanted beams onto the concrete floor. Dust danced in the air as she unloaded her gear, setting up her tools near the back of the warehouse. She'd already begun the task of clearing out debris, but there was still so much to do. She made a mental checklist. Clear the space, assess the roof, check the plumbing, and figure out how to make the place feel alive again. Jess was lost in the rhythmic clink of her hammer, pulling out nails from the rusted shelves and prying apart old, broken equipment. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed throughout the vast empty space. It was oddly comforting. A place like this, with so much history, had its own language. It spoke to Jess in a way her old garage never did. Here, she felt like she could breathe freely. But as she made her way to the far end of the room, that feeling of unease from the day before returned. The hum, that same soft vibration beneath the floor, had gotten louder. It was subtle, but persistent, like a heartbeat buried deep inside the earth. Must be the old furnace, Jess muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. Or some old pipe system. This place is ancient. But as she bent down to check the floor near where she thought the noise might be coming from, she realized something that made her pause. There were no pipes running beneath this section of the floor. No vents, no machinery. Just concrete. The faint hum was something else entirely. Jess stood up, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the floor again. The area in front of her looked like it had been left untouched for years, but there was something odd about the way the dust settled. It wasn't as thick here as in the rest of the warehouse. She crouched again and gently brushed her fingers along the edge of the floor, feeling for any cracks or gaps. A small piece of metal poked out from the concrete, and Jess couldn't help but pull at it. It didn't take much effort before a hidden seam appeared, running along the floor like a door to some unseen space beneath. Her heart skipped a beat. Okay, now that's interesting, she whispered to herself. She grabbed her crowbar, her curiosity piqued, and wedged it into the seam. The metal groaned in protest, but with a few firm pushes, Jess was able to pry open a section of the concrete floor. The opening revealed a small, rusty hatch, completely out of place amidst the otherwise solid concrete. Jess knelt down beside it, staring at the worn label above the hatch. It was faint, almost faded beyond recognition, but she could make out a few words: emergency access, and something that looked like nuclear. Her fingers traced the faded letters, the strange word sending a shiver up her spine. Seriously, Jess muttered under her breath. What kind of warehouse has a nuclear emergency access hatch? She paused, hand still resting on the handle. Part of her wanted to leave it alone, to chalk it up to some kind of government relic, or a prank from the previous owner. But the pull of mystery was too strong. After a moment's hesitation, she grabbed the handle and pulled. The hatch creaked open, revealing a narrow, rusted staircase that descended into darkness. A musty, cold air rushed up, sending a chill through Jess's body. It smelled stale, as if this place hadn't been touched in years, maybe decades. Her heart raced. Was this some kind of underground vault? Maybe a storage area? The idea of it being tied to something nuclear made her uneasy, but the mechanic in her couldn't resist the urge to explore. She needed to know what was down there. Jess stood, wiping her hands on her jeans, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and dread. She had been prepared to face the unknown with this warehouse, but this was something else entirely. It wasn't just dust and decay anymore. There was something hidden here. Something more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed a flashlight from her bag, turned it on, and pointed it toward the stairs. With one last glance at the seemingly empty warehouse, she stepped forward, her boots clicking softly on the metal steps as she descended into the unknown. The air grew colder as Jess descended further into the darkness. The flashlight's beam cut through the heavy, stale air, revealing more of the narrow stairwell. The walls were damp, with peeling paint and rust streaks running down like forgotten veins. She could feel the weight of the years pressing against her, each step sending a small shudder through the old metal staircase. At the bottom, the staircase opened up into a large underground chamber, the air even thicker than before. Jess took a deep breath, the coolness of the place hitting her lungs like a wave of ice. Her eyes scanned the room. It was even larger than she had expected, filled with rows of steel storage cabinets, old, worn equipment, and metal shelves covered in dust and grime. But it was the walls that caught her attention. Massive steel doors, reinforced with thick bolts, lined one side of the chamber. They were ominous, like something out of an old movie, and Jess couldn't help but shiver. She'd heard rumors about government bunkers in the area, but she never imagined she'd be standing in one. A low hum reverberated through the space, filling the silence with an unsettling presence. Jess walked further into the chamber, drawn to the faint glow of green lights coming from one of the far corners. As she moved closer, the source of the light became clear: a large control panel, old and dusty, but still intact. Its buttons were faded, and some of the screens were cracked, but the eerie green glow of the lights flickered and hummed as if the machinery were still alive. She reached out cautiously, her fingers brushing over the cold surface of the console. A soft beep echoed through the room. Jess froze, her heart racing as the sound echoed in the silence. "What the hell?" she muttered. The console was still functional, and whatever it was controlling seemed to be active. Jess wasn't sure whether to be fascinated or terrified, but her curiosity pushed her forward. She ran her hand over the controls again, triggering a faint whirring sound from behind one of the steel doors. Something was hidden there, and it was responding to her presence. A sudden noise from behind her made Jess jump. She whipped around, her pulse pounding in her ears. It was nothing more than a rat scurrying across the floor, but the moment of fear was enough to make her reconsider everything. Jess took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She wasn't afraid of rats or a little dust, but the feeling in her gut was telling her this place was more than just an old abandoned bunker. Something was wrong, something about the way the air felt, the way the machines responded to her touch. As she moved through the room, she noticed that the shelves, once filled with old, decaying equipment, now seemed strangely organized. Some of the metal crates appeared to be locked, and others were sealed tight with rusted locks. The labels, barely visible in the dim light, read, "Classified, restricted, and dangerous materials." The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. What kind of warehouse had this? What kind of place was this? Jess's thoughts were interrupted by another sound: a deep, mechanical click. The green lights flickered once more, and the hum of the machines grew louder, more urgent. She instinctively took a step back, her instincts telling her to leave. But the pull of the mystery was stronger than the fear creeping in. She had come this far, and she couldn't stop now. She spotted another control panel at the far end of the room, its lights flashing erratically. Without thinking, she walked toward it, drawn by the strange sense of urgency building in her chest. As she approached, the temperature seemed to drop, and the air became heavy, almost suffocating. The panel lit up as she got closer, and a large screen in the center flickered to life. Words appeared on the screen, flashing in red letters. "Nuclear storage, system online. Access restricted. Code required." Jess's breath caught in her throat. Nuclear? What was this place? It wasn't just some old abandoned bunker. It was something far more dangerous. And Jess knew, in that moment, that her discovery was about to take a dark turn. The sound of her heart pounding in her ears drowned out the hum of the machines as she stood frozen before the control panel. The room seemed to close in on her, the weight of the secret pressing down on her chest. She had found something no one was ever supposed to find, and now, there was no turning back. Jess stood in front of the blinking control panel, her fingers hovering over the buttons. Her breath came in short, anxious gasps, and for a moment, she considered turning back. This had gone beyond curiosity. She was standing in a government facility, potentially dealing with something far more dangerous than she ever could have imagined. But her instinct to understand, to uncover the truth, pushed her forward. She glanced over the control panel again. Nuclear storage system online. Those words had been etched into her mind. But the flashing, access restricted, code required, was a reminder that she was out of her depth. What if she triggered something she shouldn't? What if the bunker had been abandoned for a reason? It wasn't just a dusty warehouse, it was a time capsule of dangerous secrets, and she had stumbled right into its heart. Jess stepped away from the panel, her eyes scanning the rest of the room. Her flashlight bounced off a large, rusted steel door at the far end, its edges chipped and worn. There was no label, no indication of what lay beyond, but the eerie, humming noise seemed to emanate from behind it. The door was different from the others, though. It wasn't locked like the others. It was almost as if it was waiting for her. Without thinking, Jess moved toward it. Her hands gripped the cold metal, pulling it open. The hinges creaked, and a gust of stale, cold air swept past her, carrying with it the faint smell of old paper and oil. Inside, the room was dark, but there was something unmistakably familiar about it, a long-forgotten feeling of control, of power. This was where the answers lay. Jess stepped in, shutting the door behind her. Jess's flashlight illuminated the room ahead, revealing shelves lined with thick binders, outdated computer terminals, and stacks of documents that hadn't seen the light of day in years. The musty, metallic scent of the bunker hit her again, and she felt the weight of history pressing in on her. This was more than a place of storage. It felt like a tomb, holding secrets long buried. The faint hum that had followed her down the stairs grew louder here, like the heartbeat of something ancient, something powerful. Jess took a slow, cautious step forward, her boots echoing on the concrete floor. Every creak of the walls, every shift in the air, made her more aware of how alone she was and how much danger she could be in. She ran her fingers along the surface of one of the terminals, its screen flickering to life at her touch. The green letters on the screen flashed quickly, too fast for her to read, before settling into a message. Access granted. Jess's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't even entered a code, and yet she was being welcomed into the bowels of this place. The thought of triggering something by mistake made her hesitate. But that strange pull, the need to know, to solve the puzzle, was stronger than fear. Jess had come this far. She needed to know what was hidden beneath the layers of time and secrecy. The terminal flashed again, and the door at the far end of the room slowly creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway, stretching deeper into the bunker. She swallowed hard, gathering her courage. This was it. The deeper she went, the further away she'd be from the life she knew. But there was no turning back now. Jess stepped forward, her feet moving soundlessly down the hallway. Jess's flashlight flickered momentarily as she made her way down the long corridor, the damp air growing colder with each step. The walls were lined with dark, rusted metal panels, and the floor was uneven, scattered with debris. The deep hum that had been her constant companion was louder here, vibrating in the walls, like the bunker itself was alive, watching, waiting. She paused at the end of the hallway, where the space opened up into a large room. Her flashlight swept over the area, and Jess gasped. Before her lay an enormous steel door, far more imposing than anything she had seen so far. It was unlike the others, thick, reinforced, and built to withstand something far more dangerous than just the test of time. The door had a single panel, now covered in years of grime, but Jess could still make out the words faintly etched into its surface: nuclear storage area. Her mind raced. This wasn't just a forgotten military base or a Cold War relic. This was a facility that had been designed to house something far more dangerous, something that had been hidden for a reason. With trembling hands, she reached out, her fingers brushing over the keypad next to the door. The faintest hint of a click sounded as her touch activated the system. The green light on the panel blinked, and the door slowly groaned open, revealing a massive vault-like room. Inside, rows of lockers and containers were neatly arranged, each sealed tight with security clasps, and each one was labeled classified or restricted. Jess stepped in cautiously, feeling the weight of the room settle around her. This was no ordinary warehouse. The walls seemed to hum with power, the air heavy with secrets that were never meant to be uncovered. Her flashlight illuminated the first of the containers, and she could make out the shape of what looked like old military equipment. Her pulse quickened. She was standing on the precipice of something dangerous, something far beyond what she could ever have imagined. Then, something moved in the far corner of the room. A shadow. Jess froze, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't alone. Jess stood frozen in place, her heart racing as the shadow in the corner of the room seemed to move again. She gripped her flashlight tightly, ready to turn it on whatever or whoever was hiding in the dimness. The air in the bunker had grown thick, heavy, with an almost tangible tension. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to run, to get out of this place, but her curiosity held her in place. The shadow moved once more, this time revealing itself as a figure, a man, hunched over one of the lockers. His back was to her, and he was dressed in a faded military uniform, the insignia long worn away by time. Jess's breath hitched. Who was this man? How long had he been here? Hello? She called out cautiously, her voice shaking more than she'd expected. The man froze, then slowly turned, his eyes wide and wild. For a moment, Jess thought he was a ghost, but as his gaze met hers, something in his expression shifted in eerie recognition, like he had been expecting her. You're not supposed to be here, he rasped, his voice hoarse from years of disuse. No one's supposed to know about this place. Jess took a step back, her hand reaching instinctively for the door behind her. Who are you? She asked, trying to steady her breath. The man blinked slowly, as if processing her question. I'm the last one left, he muttered. They told us this would stay buried, forever. Jess didn't know what to make of him. She had so many questions. What was this place? Why had it been hidden for so long? And who was he? Before she could ask more, the man turned back to the locker, his fingers trembling as he began to unlock it with a key that looked as ancient as the bunker itself. I've been waiting for someone to find it, he murmured, almost to himself. Waiting for someone who would understand. What's inside? As the locker door creaked open, a hidden compartment revealed a set of files, dusty and yellowed with age. Jess stepped forward cautiously, her curiosity piqued. She had no idea what kind of answers these files might hold, but she knew one thing for sure. This man and this place were tied to something much bigger than she could have imagined. With a deep breath, Jess reached for the files, ready to uncover the secrets that had been buried for decades. Jess carefully opened the first file, the paper crinkling under her fingers as the faint smell of old ink and dust filled the air. The man beside her stood silently, his eyes never leaving her hands. There was a weight in his gaze, a mix of fear and desperation. She began to skim the contents of the file, and as her eyes moved over the yellowed pages, the pieces of the mystery slowly began to come together. The papers were filled with technical jargon, blueprints of the bunker's layout, and names she didn't recognize. But what caught her attention was a series of handwritten notes scrawled across the final page. Do not activate the system. The risk of contamination is irreversible. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. The finality of the warning was unsettling. Her fingers trembled as she turned the page, desperate to understand. What was this system? Why was it so dangerous? She looked at the man beside her. What does this mean? What's in here? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's eyes widened, his face paling. It's not just a bunker, he said quietly, his voice low with a hint of fear. It's a containment facility. This place was built to store things that should never see the light of day. Jess felt a chill creep up her spine as she tried to process what he was saying. Containment facility? What could possibly be so dangerous that it required a whole bunker to hide it away? The man continued, his voice trembling. We were supposed to make sure it stayed hidden, kept under lock and key. But after the incident, well, they abandoned the place. They didn't tell anyone. They didn't want anyone to know what we were holding here. Jess's mind raced. What happened? What's inside? He shook his head, a pained expression crossing his face. I don't know all the details, but the risks, they're greater than you can imagine. People were exposed to whatever was inside. They were never the same. That's why they sealed this place off. Jess stood in stunned silence, the weight of his words sinking in. Her heart pounded as she glanced around the room, the rows of sealed containers and old military equipment taking on a new, far more ominous light. This wasn't just an abandoned warehouse. It was a prison of sorts, holding something so dangerous that even the people who had worked here had been left in the dark. She couldn't help but feel the pull to learn more, but the warning echoed in her mind. Was she prepared to uncover the truth? Could she survive whatever had been buried here all these years? The man's voice brought her back to the moment. You need to leave, he said urgently. You've uncovered too much already. This place isn't safe. But Jess wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. She had come this far, and something inside her told her that the truth was within her reach. The risk felt impossible, but so did the chance of stopping now. Jess's pulse quickened as the man's words hung in the air, his warning lingering like a shadow over her thoughts. This place isn't safe. The words kept echoing in her mind, but she couldn't just walk away now. Something deep inside her urged her to push forward, to unravel whatever secrets had been locked away for so long. The man seemed to sense her hesitation, his face tightening with fear. He stepped closer, his hand trembling as he reached for the file. Jess still clutched. "You don't understand," he said, his voice desperate. "You think you've uncovered something big, but you have no idea what you're dealing with." Jess turned to face him, her grip tightening on the file. "Then tell me what's inside. What did they store here? Why? Was this place hidden from the world?" He glanced at the metal door, his eyes darting toward the shadows of the room. A chill ran down Jess's spine. Something about his reaction told her they weren't alone. "I don't know everything," the man replied, his voice shaking. "But there were experiments, weapons, things that should have been destroyed, not stored in a place like this. The people who worked here, they were told it was all under control, but it wasn't. We were all in over our heads." The air felt thick with tension, and Jess instinctively took a step back, her gaze scanning the room. There was a feeling now, an unsettling awareness, that they weren't just dealing with abandoned military equipment and old paperwork. There was something alive down here, something that had been waiting to be discovered. Suddenly, the hum of the bunker grew louder, more insistent. The ground beneath Jess's feet vibrated, and the room seemed to close in on her. She turned to the man, who was now backing away slowly, his face pale with fear. "It's coming," he whispered, almost too quietly for Jess to hear. A loud bang echoed through the room, shaking the walls. Jess froze. The sound came again, this time louder, closer. It was unmistakable. Footsteps. Someone, or something, was approaching the bunker. Jess's heart raced as she darted toward the steel door, her mind racing. The man grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "You have to leave now," he shouted. "They're here. They can't let you know what's inside. You've uncovered too much already." Jess jerked away, her mind locked on the urgency of the situation. Whoever was coming was not here for a casual visit. This was serious. The sound of boots grew louder, echoing down the hallway toward them. She had moments to decide what to do next. There was no time for questions. The threat was real, and it was closing in fast. Without thinking, Jess grabbed the man's hand and sprinted toward the far corner of the room. They ducked behind a stack of crates, heartbeats pounding in unison. She could barely hear the footsteps now. They were right outside the door. The silence in the room was suffocating as they both held their breath, waiting for whatever was on the other side of that door to move closer. Jess glanced at the man, his face a mask of fear. Whatever this place was hiding, it wasn't just dangerous, it was worth killing for. Jess's heart pounded in her ears as she crouched behind the crates, eyes fixed on the door. Every second stretched into eternity. The footsteps were just outside, so close she could almost feel the air shift with each step. The man beside her was shaking, his face pale with fear, and Jess could sense the urgency in his every movement. "Who are they?" she whispered, barely able to catch her breath. The man's eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an escape. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze locked onto the far end of the room, where another set of heavy doors were barely visible in the shadows. A flicker of recognition passed over his face. "They're the ones who locked this place up," he finally muttered. "The ones who were supposed to keep it a secret. But they're not just guarding a bunker, they're keeping something inside. And they'll do anything to protect it." Jess's mind raced. This was bigger than just an abandoned military warehouse. This was a place of power, of secrets that could change everything. She could feel the weight of those secrets pressing in around her, and the thought of letting them stay buried made her stomach churn. But if these people, or whatever they were willing to kill to keep the truth hidden, Jess knew she had to act fast. The man's voice cut through her thoughts. "We can't stay here. If they find us, they'll—" He was cut off by the sharp sound of the door creaking open. Jess's breath caught in her throat. They were running out of time. Without thinking, Jess grabbed the man's arm and pulled him toward the far doors, the only possible exit. She wasn't sure where they would lead, but it was their only chance. Her heart raced as they sprinted across the room, dodging around debris and crates. Every footstep behind them grew louder, closer. Jess's mind was focused, moving on pure adrenaline now. They reached the doors, but they were locked. The man quickly fumbled for the key, his hands shaking as he inserted it into the lock. The door clicked open with a sound too loud in the oppressive silence. "We have to go now," Jess urged, her voice tight with panic. The man pushed the door open, revealing a narrow passageway. Jess didn't hesitate, pulling him through and into the darkness beyond. They ran, not looking back, the sound of pursuit growing fainter as they moved deeper into the maze of tunnels. The further they went, the more isolated they became. The feeling of being chased didn't leave Jess, though. Every echo, every creak of the old structure made her feel like they were being watched, hunted even. They had only minutes, maybe seconds, before the people inside this facility realized they were gone. Jess couldn't afford to waste any more time. She had to find answers, and fast. The narrow passageway twisted and turned, stretching deep into the bowels of the bunker. Jess and the man ran in silence, their footsteps echoing off the cold metal walls. Her mind raced, her thoughts a jumble of questions, fears, and plans. What were they really dealing with? Who were these people that would stop at nothing to protect the secrets hidden beneath this building? And what had they been keeping in that nuclear storage room? The man beside her, though still trembling, seemed to know more than he'd let on. But he wasn't speaking. His eyes were darting around, his hand tightly gripping hers as they sprinted down the dark hallway. Jess could see the tension in his face, and her own anxiety began to grow. "How much farther?" Jess asked, her voice strained. "Where are we going?" The man didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked behind them, as if to make sure they weren't being followed. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and urgent. "There's an exit, an old service tunnel that leads out of here. It was used to transport supplies in and out before the place was sealed. But it's not safe. It's heavily guarded." "Great," Jess muttered under her breath. Just what I needed to hear. Her fingers tightened around the flashlight, and she instinctively reached for her belt, where she kept a small knife. She wasn't a fighter, but she had a survival instinct that had gotten her through more than one rough situation. Right now, it was kicking in. They turned a corner and found themselves in front of a heavy metal door. The man pulled out a set of keys and quickly began working the lock, his hands shaky but practiced. "We can't go back now," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "They'll be looking for us any minute." Just as the door clicked open, Jess's ears pricked. A distant sound, the unmistakable hum of machinery, filled the air. And then, far closer than she'd hoped, the sharp sound of footsteps. Jess's heart skipped a beat. "They're coming." The man's face hardened, his earlier fear giving way to resolve. He pushed the door open and motioned for Jess to follow. "In here, now." They ducked through the door and into a dimly lit room, the heavy door closing silently behind them. The room was full of old equipment and crates stacked high, much like the rest of the bunker. But there was no time to look around. Jess's eyes flicked to a narrow hallway at the far side of the room. "Quick, through there," the man urged. "We're almost out." They sprinted down the hallway, the air growing colder as they moved. Jess could feel her muscles aching from the exertion, but she pushed forward, her eyes scanning for any sign of an exit. They reached another door, and the man stopped to catch his breath. "This leads to the service tunnel," he said, trying the lock. "I just need a minute." Before he could finish, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway toward them. Jess's breath caught in her throat as she realized they were cornered. The only way out was through the door in front of them. But the heavy, metallic sound of boots grew louder, closer. The man cursed, his hands fumbling with the lock. "They're almost here." Jess turned and looked behind her. The light in the hallway seemed to grow dimmer, and she could hear them now, the voices, low and guttural, like shadows closing in on them. They were trapped. The door in front of them loomed large, a heavy, reinforced barrier that separated Jess and the man from the only escape route they had left. Jess's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the man struggle with the lock. Behind them, the footsteps were getting closer, too close for comfort. She could feel the weight of their impending doom pressing down on her with every passing second. "Come on," she muttered under her breath, her fingers itching for something to do. The man's hands were shaking with a mixture of fear and frustration, and she could see his panic starting to rise. He needed a moment, but time wasn't something they had. The voices behind them were unmistakable, now dark, threatening murmurs that sent a chill down Jess's spine. They were being hunted. The door, the last hope for their escape, was still stubbornly locked. Jess's mind raced as she quickly assessed their situation. They had no weapons, no real backup. Just the two of them, running on instinct and desperation. A loud bang echoed from down the hall, the sound of something slamming into the walls. The man flinched but kept working on the lock. "We don't have time," Jess said, her voice sharp with urgency. Is there any other way out? The man's eyes widened. He looked at her, then back at the door. I think there's a maintenance shaft nearby. But it's not far from here, and it's not exactly safe. It's our only chance. Jess felt her heart skip a beat. A maintenance shaft? That sounded like the kind of place people didn't come back from. But in their situation, any option was better than being caught in the open. I don't care, she said firmly, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the narrow hallway. Lead the way. Now. The man didn't hesitate. His eyes locked on her, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something in them, resolve, maybe even hope. He turned and motioned for her to follow. They ran through the dark hallway, the echoes of their footsteps reverberating through the cold metallic air. Jess's mind was a blur of fear and determination. They had no idea how far the maintenance shaft was, or what lay in the dark recesses of this abandoned bunker, but they couldn't afford to stop. We need to hurry, the man said, his voice breathless. They're close. Jess didn't need him to tell her that. She could feel the tension building in the air around them, like an electric current that made every moment feel more critical than the last. They rounded a corner and came to another door, this one smaller and more unassuming. The man reached for the handle, his hands slick with sweat, and Jess's heart skipped as she heard the unmistakable sound of heavy boots coming closer. They were almost here, almost too close. The man wrenched the door open just as the voices behind them grew louder. Jess didn't look back. She bolted through the door without a second thought, diving into the maintenance shaft that stretched into the unknown. Behind her, she could hear the footsteps stop at the door. They were just moments away from being discovered. Without another word, the man slammed the door shut, behind them, locking it with a loud click. Jess exhaled sharply, her heart still racing. But it wasn't over yet. They were out of sight, but they weren't out of danger. The maintenance shaft was narrow, dark, and dank. The air smelled of mildew, and every step echoed too loudly in the stillness, making Jess feel more exposed than ever. She moved quickly, keeping pace with the man, whose face was now set with a grim determination. Their footsteps reverberated off the narrow walls as they crawled through the dimly lit tunnel, not looking back. The space felt like a maze, twisting and turning in ways that only added to Jess's unease. She could hear the faint hum of the bunker's ventilation system above them, a low, constant drone that did nothing to mask the sounds of their rapid breathing. They had managed to escape the immediate danger, but Jess knew they couldn't keep running forever. Their pursuers, whoever they were, would eventually find them. The man had already told her the bunker was heavily guarded, and as far as Jess could tell, they were being hunted by more than just a group of desperate soldiers. Something much darker was at play here. Where are we going? Jess whispered urgently, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing attention. The man glanced over his shoulder, his eyes wide with fear. There's an exit, but it's through the back of the bunker. If we can get to the surface, we have a chance. But it's going to be heavily guarded. And if we don't hurry, we're not going to make it. Jess nodded grimly. I understand. We need to move fast. As they continued down the shaft, Jess couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was following them. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, her instincts telling her that they weren't alone. She wanted to turn and look, but doing so would only slow them down. The tunnel had no windows, no exits to hide behind, only endless metal walls and the oppressive silence that felt like it was closing in on them. Suddenly, a harsh metallic sound echoed from behind. Jess froze, her breath catching in her throat. It was unmistakable. The sound of a door slamming open. Her heart pounded in her chest. They were close. Too close. Run, the man shouted, urgency ringing in his voice. They're coming. Without another word, Jess pushed forward, her legs burning with the effort as they sprinted toward the end of the shaft. The tunnel seemed endless, the flickering lights above them growing dimmer as they ran. But Jess couldn't afford to look back now. She had to focus. They reached a small ladder at the end of the shaft, leading up to a narrow hatch in the ceiling. The man scrambled up first, his hands shaking as he reached for the handle. Jess followed close behind, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the ladder as she climbed. She could hear the faint sound of boots behind them, growing closer with every passing second. Just as she reached the top of the ladder, the hatch swung open, and Jess pulled herself out into the daylight. The fresh air hit her like a wave, and for the briefest moment, she felt a sense of relief. But the danger wasn't over. They were out, but they weren't free yet. The man looked around quickly, scanning their surroundings. Jess did the same. The area was isolated, a field surrounded by dense trees and a high barbed wire fence. Beyond that, she could make out the faint outline of a distant road. They weren't safe yet, but the surface felt like freedom compared to the claustrophobic bunker below. "We have to move," the man said urgently, his eyes still darting around. "They'll be coming for us soon." Jess nodded, her mind racing. She wasn't sure where they were going, but she knew one thing for sure. They couldn't let the bunker's secrets stay hidden. Not now. Not when they had the chance to stop whatever was happening. But as they began to move toward the fence, Jess heard the unmistakable sound of an engine in the distance rising louder, closer. Someone was coming for them, and they didn't have much time to escape. "We need to run," Jess said, her voice steely with determination. They turned, racing for the tree line, hoping to disappear before they were caught. Jess pushed herself harder, her legs burning with each step, as she and the man raced toward the trees. The distant sound of the engine grew louder, its rumble reverberating through the ground beneath them. They had no idea who was chasing them, but Jess didn't need to know to feel the threat closing in on them. Whoever they were serious. The trees loomed ahead like a barrier, their thick trunks offering some semblance of cover. Jess glanced back, trying to gauge how much time they had. The hatch they'd just emerged from was barely visible now, hidden by the dense underbrush, but she knew the enemy would find it. They always found things like that. And when they did, there would be no stopping them. "We're almost there," the man gasped beside her. "The fence is just ahead." Jess nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. They were close now, but she could already see the shape of an armored vehicle kicking up dust in the distance. Her heart skipped a beat. They weren't going to make it. There was no way they could outrun that thing. "We'll climb the fence," Jess said, her voice urgent. "I know a place. There's a break in the wires just ahead." The man nodded, his face pale and drawn. They pushed harder, the rustling of leaves underfoot becoming louder as they reached the barbed wire fence. Jess didn't wait. She grabbed the edge of the wire and scrambled up, the sharp metal biting into her palms. Every movement felt like it could be their last. As Jess reached the top, she glanced back. The vehicle was much closer now. Her heart raced. She had no choice but to go over the fence, even though she knew it would be a painful climb. She dropped down on the other side, landing hard on the uneven ground, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The man was right behind her, already halfway over the fence. They kept running, the sound of their pursuers growing more insistent. Jess's mind was focused solely on the escape. The road was just ahead, and the promise of freedom was within reach. But she knew it wasn't just about escaping, it was about survival. Whatever was inside that bunker, whatever had been buried so long ago, would continue to haunt her, unless she did something. And she couldn't stop now. Not when she was so close to exposing the truth. Jess's breath came in sharp gasps as she and the man raced down the narrow, dusty road. The armored vehicle was still a threat, its engine roaring behind them, but for the first time since she'd discovered the bunker, Jess felt a flicker of hope. They were almost there. She could see the curve in the road up ahead where an old truck was parked, its engine idling. The man beside her, still gasping for breath, looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "You really think this is it?" he asked. "I don't have another choice," Jess replied, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We have to keep moving." They reached the truck just as the sound of the vehicle behind them grew deafening. The man quickly jumped into the passenger seat while Jess climbed into the driver's side. She slammed the door shut and started the engine, the truck sputtering to life as she slammed her foot on the accelerator. The tires screeched as they tore down the road, the vehicle chasing them just moments behind. Jess's hands gripped the wheel tightly, her eyes focused on the road ahead. There was no time to look back. Not now. They had to escape, and there was only one direction they could go: forward. As the truck sped down the winding road, the trees on either side began to blur, their dark outlines dissolving into the night. Jess pushed the truck to its limits, hoping the engine wouldn't fail them now. She glanced at the man beside her, who was still silent, his face etched with fear and uncertainty. "I don't know what's next," Jess said, her voice steady, "but we're getting out, and we're bringing the truth with us." The road stretched on, and Jess felt a sense of purpose growing stronger within her. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting for the future. The truck bounced over uneven ground as Jess pushed the accelerator harder, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror. The armored vehicle had fallen behind, but it wasn't gone. Jess knew they weren't out of danger yet. Every passing minute felt like a countdown, the pressure mounting with every mile they put between themselves and the bunker. The man in the passenger seat was quiet now, his eyes staring out the window as if lost in thought. Jess couldn't blame him. They had both just uncovered a nightmare buried deep beneath the earth. The secrets that bunker held were far too dangerous to be kept hidden any longer. But what now? The world wasn't ready for the truth, not the one they'd uncovered. "You okay?" Jess asked, her voice softer now. The man finally turned to her, his face tired but resolute. "I've spent years keeping this secret, and now I'm just trying to figure out how to let the world know. But I don't think they'll believe us. If they do, it's going to shake the foundations of everything they think they know." Jess exhaled slowly, her grip tightening on the wheel. "Then we make them believe." A moment of silence passed between them as they navigated the winding road. The dark trees that lined the highway began to thin, and in the distance, the lights of a small town glimmered ahead. Jess knew they needed to stop, to figure out what to do next, but the weight of what they'd discovered was still with her, heavy on her chest. "We'll get the story out there," she said, her voice firm. "It's bigger than both of us now. We can't let it die in the dark." The man nodded, his face grim but determined. "You're right. This isn't over." The road ahead seemed endless, but Jess felt something shift within her, a quiet resolve. No matter what it took, no matter the cost, she was going to finish this. The truth was out there, and now it was time to let the world see it.